Okay, this is my research paper, and as you can see, it is going to talk about varying philosophies of education. I was inspired to write this because we were talking in Evan's class about philosophies of education, and Evans had talked about how it is important for each one of us to develop our own philosophy of education. So, oops, I almost scrolled too down far. Um, there are three major types of education, or philosophy, excuse me. There's teacher-centered, there's student-centered, and society-centered. And teacher-centered doesn't mean, oh, it's all about the teacher, but teacher-centered refers to it being more focused as being, oh, it's more focused on what the teacher does while in the classroom, whereas student-centered focuses on more what the student does or how the student responds to the teacher in the classroom. So if we scroll down, there's right now there's this paragraph right here serves to talk about the different types of philosophies that there are, kind of as an introduction. And so I went through and just talked about the teacher-centered philosophies. So right here, this is called essentialism, and it basically it's talking about basically the essentials in the classroom. Here we have intellectual and moral standards that schools should teach. And so, whoops, sorry. And so right here, right below it, I talk about why it's teacher-centered, because the teachers believe there's a common core of knowledge that students need in order to be successful. That doesn't necessarily refer to the Common Core standards, but it definitely alludes to them. The next one is perennialism, and that was one that I kind of liked. It focuses on reasoning and studying the past to inform our present. I'm not much of a social studies person, but I know that studying the past is very important. Right here it talks about the origins being found in the teachings of Aristotle. And so this is kind of the idea of the school nurturing and developing student potential, except for the fact that student potential is kind of dictated by the school, and so that could potentially be dangerous because I feel like that it creates a closed-minded effect. I talk a little bit more about that in my conclusion. Then I move on to student-centered philosophies. So we talk about right there in the opening paragraph, concern is placed more heavily on the student, like I said before. So we have progressivism. I won't talk too much about this chapter because we had a really awesome discussion earlier in the semester on what progressivism is and what it isn't. And then there's a couple other ideologies that relate to progressivism but are not exactly the same. Here we have existentialism. And so this is kind of the idea that any man is an island. They are their own man, and they will be rewarded or disciplined based on their own works and their own privileges. Below that, we have humanism. And humanism kind of evolved out of existentialism. It has some similarities. The idea right here of doing individual development, and even below, I state how it can also have overlap with progressivism. But with kind of progressivism, we talk more about experience, and like humanism talks just not only about having the experiences, but understanding the experiences, kind of being able to make something of what is going on and being able to arrive at a conclusion. The next one we have is constructivism, and that's kind of the idea of students being able to construct their own reality. It's talking about having hands-on learning, which in my methods class we've talked a lot about how students should be able to interact with the subject in a way that is tangible. And so right here, hands-on learning is a very specific type of experience that students can have in the classroom. So that's something that we want to talk about. And then we move on to some of the socially centric philosophies. They're called reconstructivism and behaviorism. And reconstructivism is kind of the idea that we can reconstruct a lot of our social issues based off of a healthy education and kind of reconstructing social systems, schooling being one of those systems. So that harkens back to kind of the question that we were asked the very first day of class is, why do students go to school? Why do we care about school? And obviously we do because we are educators or aspiring educators. Behaviorism here, that kind of alludes to the kind of reward and punishment system. The idea that, by rewarding or punishing certain behaviors, we can manipulate the behaviors. I don't really like the idea of manipulation, and it talks about how, well, we learned that through that doesn't always work too well. It does if students have healthy self-esteem levels, but if they don't, it can really backfire. And so here's kind of where I start summarizing. And then I eventually break away from the traditional research paper, which is very academic and very third person. Not that I'm not being academic, but I wanted to move into my own reflection because that was what motivated my paper in the first place. And so I felt that I would not be doing justice or being honest if I did not talk about my own personal thoughts on the issue. And so I liked a lot of little parts of the topics. Let's see if I can highlight some ideas. I really like the idea of nurturing and developing the student's potential and perennialism. I did talk about how I don't agree with the school being the end-all be-all and knowing how to nurture, and so I'd want to make sure that I'm careful about that I don't assume that I know everything that's going on. Progressivism, I really like the idea of exposing students to different experiences in regards to the subject matter. Now, I recognize, though, I talked in the just next sentence about how that's difficult to exploit sometimes, depending on what the school curriculum involves, what I'm given. But the idea is to do the best that I can. And then also, let's see where, humanism, giving the idea of choice. And I think it's not been mentioned in Evan's class, but mentioned in some of our other conversations. The idea of giving students choice can cause them to have ownership over the class. We don't want to give them free reign, obviously, but we can definitely go ahead and serve their wishes, maybe by giving them an either-or situation. Here's my bibliography. I referenced Berliner's 50 Myths and Lies right here. I also utilized a couple other articles. Let's see. This one right here I really like because it's actually a master's thesis on educational philosophies. I really gleaned a lot from that, even though it did have a particular bias that I kind of had to avoid, talking about Christian philosophy of science education. I did not want to talk about Christian philosophy. I wanted to talk about educational philosophy, and I'm not going into science. I'm going into math. But other than that, it was a really great resource. So that is my presentation.